GDPR is and how to actually prepare for it, to actually comply. Now there's a little anecdote because GDPR actually came into effect in 2016. It's only the penalties that are kicking in now. So I'm guessing everybody here is already in compliance because it's not the penalties that we all care about. But let's just spend this panel making sure. So I'll introduce you guys first. We have Gali Arad Kovacs, the Senior Marketing Manager at Netapp. We have Shahar Maor, Information Security Manager at Outbrain. We have Advocate Lior Etgar, who we share similar t-shirts. He's from Tulchinsky, Stern, Marciano, Cohen, Levitski, and Co. law offices. Thank you, Lior. We have Omer, Shmueli, VP of Legal Affairs at Cohen. And we have Zilberman, Caspi, Partner, Head of Data, Privacy, and GDPR at Konfidas. So welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be here. I want to start a bit light. So the big platforms have announced updates to their terms of service, but no real proactive guidelines. So it's actually very confusing because it seems like as marketers, it's our responsibility to know what we're supposed to do, and the guidelines are very unclear. So how is a company supposed to even start understanding what to do? You want to take it?
I would. Bring the mind.
Okay, it's a very complex question. So first, the good news is that GDPR is a kind of opportunity. It's not a risk, it's not a threat, it's an opportunity. It's something that if you're bringing enough value to your customers, to end users, then your end users, you will be willing to pay with their data. They will be willing to pay, to give you their data, and then you can process the data, you can do whatever you do when you want, you can profit. So this is the good news. The bad news is if this is the data that you first are hearing about GDPR, you're in a big trouble because the GDPR is like a minefield. That if you're inside, you'll never be able to go from this minefield because you have already collected this data from your end users, and you have to clarify or make it clear the database in order to keep using it. So the first question is whether the database that you are already holding, whether you got the consent, the real consent from your users, which as I said before, it should be explicit consent, something which the user has wanted to give you this data, and then you can use it for your own purposes. So this is the first, to see what databases you're holding and what are the users you can make from it. For example, for Como, what we serve, our platform is for small, medium businesses, and the technology which we bring to our customers like the giants. So like Facebook changed their privacy policies, and like Amazon, Google, or whatever published their new privacy policies. We have our own privacy policy, so if you are connected to our network, then you can use our privacy policy, and then the data that we collect for you and share you, our customer, then it's compliant with the GDPR.
Okay, and Shahar, when did you first realize that you have to deal with this GDPR monster?
It was a year and a half ago when we kind of monitored GDPR when it came published in April 16. But we started the official kickoff on September 16. And fortunately, we had a very good buy-in from our management, and I think it was a very brilliant thing to do, just to get a good sponsorship from our management and understand the scope and what we need to do internally. We've created a very vast and elaborate plan to cope and comply with the GDPR. And we did a lot of other stuff to first prepare the organization to do this very unintuitive transition from data-centric organization that consume a lot of data without thinking about what we're going to do with it, to a GDPR-ready organization that think about every next step, every new initiative. When you talk about privacy by design, for example, not just a statement. This is a change of culture that you need to do and you need to understand. And I must say that I've noticed a lot of confusion with the earlier discussion with you guys, thinking about if I store data on Salesforce, but I got a consent, but Salesforce didn't get the consent, then we don't have to get consent again for the user. It's more complicated, and this is something that needs to go step by step. And I suggest that you start with thinking about the risks. All the client-facing data that you store, process, or need in order to run your business. Once you understand what type of client-facing data do you have, you need to think about what are the penalties you're going to face if you're not treating this data right. That's the basic concept of GDPR. If you understand that, and if you demonstrate compliance by documenting, creating workflows, and properly communicate it, and be transparent about it, then you're like 50% through.
So there's something, can you hear me? There's something that I think interests a lot of the people in the crowd here. And as HubSpot users, we do what GDPR refers to as profiling. So we look into what blog posts people read, and we look at if they opened an email, and if they clicked, and we try to get this timeline of them, which is in essence profiling. So is that allowed? Do we need to get consent? Do we need to show them their timeline? Maybe we can let even Lior as a legal.
Actually, I would like to refer not to the question about profiling, but to Shahar.
Sure.
I would like to add that the first thing that we need to do is, like any other regulation that we're dealing with in other areas, the approach of the company is the first thing that we need to establish. We need to have a very open approach, and I think that it's all about risk management eventually. The GDPR, like any other regulations, require resources, it requires management resources, it requires a lot of, sometimes like we call, like the GDPR calls, technical measures, and we need to be very, very careful about it at the first stage. And I think that the first thing that we need to do is to have management awareness, and then to gain their efforts and their attention. And after that, like any other project that we're dealing with in the company, it's like the people here said, we're starting the kickoff and then things just roll over. And I think that in our experience, where the management is involved, the process is very, very fast forward, and it's best for everyone.
The technicalities are the ones that are actually confusing to people, because there's all these case scenarios. So, like, with respect to back to my question about HubSpot users and profiling, does any of you know how to approach it?
I think that everyone.
First of all, hi everybody. I'm from Konfidas. We're a cybersecurity and privacy consulting company. We got into the GDPR about 2 years ago with the Amdocs, which saw it coming, and then our bigger clients are Orbotech, Elal, Team, and startups as well. Our smallest client that is going to be GDPR compliant is a startup of 2 people, and he's going to be GDPR compliant. And actually, the funny part is that regarding profiling and so on, he has more personal data from Orbotech and Team together. These 2 people, they store a huge amount of personal data.
I think even Artsuki started that way once.
Yeah, exactly. This is the point. This is the point, that the size in this matter of GDPR doesn't matter. Regarding to profiling, we need to get to understand the GDPR from its basis in terms of nothing. It's not written in the GDPR in any place that you can or cannot do an action that you do today. But there are new rules to these actions, and the basic rule of profiling is that you have to have this match and a clear handshake between you, the company, and the data subject. The data subject is the client, for example. Yeah. So if you're transparent and you tell him that this is what you're doing, you're watching.
Sorry.
Very important.
I just want to try to ground that to an example.
Yeah.
So if a person downloads an ebook, they provide their email address, and now we start sending them sequences of emails, and I think many here do that. And we do that based on profiling. We make it personal.
Sure.
And we look at what they did. If they read X blog post, then we think, okay,
Exactly.
this might interest them.
So in the first.
Are we now obligated to tell them what we know about them?
So no, but you have to tell them that this is what you're doing. You're watching their behavior, and you're adapting your offers to their behavior. And this is what you need to tell them in a clear, in a transparent and fair way.
Once they
And
download
once-
the ebook?
I'll go through the timeline a little bit more in details, okay? But the point is that now, if the customer, the data subject, he gave that consent, so this activity is okay. If he didn't give his consent, the news, the technical news here, and this is for the technical people in the crowd, you need to start to develop an ability to deal with this customer. You can say, okay, if he doesn't want this kind of activity for us to do with his data, we're gonna give the service, it's okay. But you will find that with time, that more and more customers and data subjects will be very sensitive for what they allow and what they don't allow you to do with their data.
But I guess time will tell exactly technically
Exactly.
how this unveils.
Yeah.
All right.
The point
Yeah.
about GDPR, which I wanted to make, I don't come from the legal and operational side.
Yeah, and it's very interesting
I'm
to
a
see from a
HubSpot
company
user,
side
and
what
we
you
come
do.
from a very big company. So, we have a fleet of lawyers handling all this stuff, but the bottom line is GDPR doesn't mean you have to stop marketing. It only means that you have to tell the users exactly what you're doing and what you're going to do with their information. That's it. So, for your, white paper example or ebook, it just means that they need to check the checkbox, saying that, because once they download that ebook, you want to put them on a nurture, right? You want to send them 3 or 4 more emails. So they need to give you that consent. And if you don't, then you can't. The only thing you can do is send them that ebook. And you could do it by, having a mandatory checkbox, which as marketers will say, oh, well, that'll make our, our conversion much lower. You can do something else that HubSpot has done as well, whereas you don't have that checkbox, but as a part of submitting, clicking submit, they're agreeing for you to send them those emails.
Yeah, which I think is
and
sort
it's
of a
not
best
like,
practice anyway.
it's not like you're bypassing anything, you're just telling them, you want to get this from me, I'm giving you something, you're giving me something. It's all about transparency.
Okay, so let me ask you something that is a bit more complex, and if you're not unsure, maybe somebody else can take this question. But what about remarketing? So a person visits the website, and then most of us chase them to death. Do we need to get their consent?
I'll let legal answer that. In my opinion, it's a part of the cookie policy, probably, where they have to accept it.
So where? How?
I think that first of all, we have clients that are doing remarketing, but we have to
You have all your clients.
we have to put it in place in the privacy policy. We have to make sure that we are in line with the legitimate interest of the company.
But most don't opt in for this.
You really can't just target someone without getting a specific, unambiguous, freely given consent. That's the truth.
Anybody doing this, just leave the room, and then you can just pretend you didn't.
Yeah, all of us are doing it. We're doing it at Outbrain. We need to actually going to change it on my first. We're going to change our the way we target leads. We already deleting old leads, and it's a very interesting discussion. By the way, how we got to the retention policy. We've decided to go with old leads. At first, when I came to our digital marketing department, and I told them that we need to decide on a proper data retention policy for old leads, and told me, hey, we can't delete old leads. We need them all. We retarget them. And I told them, do you really retarget the leads after 3 years? And they told me,
Yes.
we don't know. They told us we really don't know. We didn't even measure it. So when they measure it and they came back with numbers, they told us that 24 months are more than enough, because they see that the higher conversion rates and the higher engagement comes from freshly given leads and those who interact with the system. And talking about ebooks and conventions, conferences, whatever, if the lead is not valuable, you don't need it on the system, it just poses a new risk. And you don't need it, you need to delete it. Think about the scenario when someone breaches your systems, steals a huge list of leads and sells it over the market. You are accountable for it. You need to take accountability, and you're going to hold responsibility for it. So it poses risk for you. So you need to think about the way to find the balance between how long do you need the leads for, and how can you find a very good way to retain it without violating any privacy rights. That's
So
the
this is
idea.
all about risk mitigation, really.
In the end, yes.
Something to make it clear, GDPR is about individuals and about personal data. So if you're not collecting personal data and not from individuals, actually GDPR doesn't apply here. So if someone clicks on an ad, but you don't know who is the person behind, and you've never collected his personal information, so you can retarget him because you don't know who it is.
But
So
if
for
you're
example,
collecting
the
it from cookies,
remarketing
that's not true,
question.
because cookies
Depends.
are...
Depends on how much information you collected by the action made by the user.
Cookies
The second,
under the GDPR are personal data.
because you know the individual, because it's the individual
I
who
know
is
the
clicked.
individual.
It depends if it identifiable, yes or not. Because you're not identifying, you cannot identify the user behind. So it's not an individual that you are targeting afterwards. The second is about consent. Our end users are clicking the consent or submitting the personal information, although no one reads the privacy policy, which actually I drafted. I read it from time to time. There is maybe some users who accidentally click on the privacy policy, and there are, of course, lawyers who were seeking for us for class actions against Como. They also read our privacy policy, so nobody reads it. So the basics behind the privacy policy is if you meet the reasonable expectations of your users. So if you collect information and the user reasonably thinks that you may use this information for this kind of purpose, then actually you can use it. It will be there in the privacy policy. But if it's something which is far behind the expectation of that user, please do not use it. This is the GDPR. This is the legitimate interest of you, or the legitimate usage of the data by you as the vendors who serve this end users.
And Elio, I think you wanted to add something?
Yeah. I would say that we need again to go back to the basics, and actually IP is personal data according to the GDPR. Cookies are personal data according to the GDPR. I don't know if you know the Article 29, the working groups that are evolving the GDPR, and the more material, more than these 88 pages in font 8, by the way, very
Can you
small.
clarify what you mean?
I mean, there is a lot of more information about this matter, but
Yes, across
all
the
this IP and in sometimes even MAC addresses are considered to be personal data. Therefore, we need to understand that this is a big change in our world. So, if we are doing activities based on this personal data, we need a lawful base to do these activities. In order to get a lawful base, you don't all time have to have consent. But for remarketing and marketing in general, it's considered to be kind of activity which is it's fundamental activity that somebody needs to give his consent to do this activity. So to do remarketing, this is something that you need to consider it from the beginning. And this is one of the big news in the GDPR, because remarketing, as it's done today, it's as we see it, is not GDPR compliant. This is this is how a lot of companies that we consult, they see it like this, and you need to do it in a different way. And the way to do it is to try. First of all, you can try get consent in earlier stages. I don't know, it's just somebody that just landed in your site, and that's it. The other way to go about it is to, but this is taking the side of it's a risk. It's a compliant risk. But you can say that this first activity, that to get the IP, for example, of a person, that will be a legitimate interest for the company to make its business, but then it's a kind of a risk. It's a risk.
It's all a matter of interpretation.
It is.
Which brings me. Yeah, I want to get to that in a minute.
I would like to have an example that we have. For example, we know of one of our clients, a CRO company, and they are enrolling people for clinical trials. And usually they're coming to a landing site to enroll to a specific clinical trial, and they would like to have their personal data for other clinical trials, which are not currently known to them.
Like Cambridge Analytics?
Good example. Well, it's a problem. It's a problem for them because they have to find a way to get the consent from the other side, because it's a medical information. It's a very personal information. On the other hand, it's a legitimate interest of the company because it's a CRO company and this is their business, like Eli said.
How come it's the legitimate interest?
Okay, there's an argument, but
business model, it's not legitimate.
It's
different.
Exactly, this is the problem. We are saying that it's not.
Yeah, but
No.
they need to get specific consent to get
Right.
to target them for another drug.
Correct.
It's not something they get it for a
Correct.
specific drug.
I want to understand.
That's the problem.
I want to understand this threat, and it's an Israeli question. So, okay, there's regulations, and it's been in effect since 2016, and now in 2018 there's penalties. But how is this going to be enforced? Is this going to be by a lot of Saul Goodmans now calling everybody who has been somehow offended and filing suits? Or is there some sort of system that's scanning what people are doing with their data? And
I'll give other people to provide longer answers, but I think that just similar to other regulations, it will start from a very clear-cut enforcement of the enforcement authorities in the EU, and then we will start to see class actions.
how are they going to enforce it? Is it by people just complaining? Or
No.
I think there's going
No,
to be
review
people
audit.
who are going to make it their profession
Right?
to find
Because
those
are you aware of
violations.
any system
There's
that's
gonna be
monitoring
new-
this use of data?
We got some requests.
We got already subject access requests from bloggers mainly to understand what type of information we know about them. And this is why we actually started thinking about our transparency piece and increase our transparency. So we are going to launch soon a user portal where everybody can just go and see based on the cookie what type of information Outbrain does know about them.
Do you also do that? Do you also provide
that's-
that transparency?
So this is something I think that all of us want to remain under the radar of the regulation. That's the regulators. That's the main objective at the moment. And I think regulators, like in the EU, like in Israel and everybody, all over the place, they're just going to start from the long-hanging fruits and addressing those giants such as Google, Facebook, with the objective to just show them that they are on the radar and they can see under the hood and try to find missing spots of compliance or something like that. That's the main thing they're going to do. Then there is a whole different group of people, like bloggers and activists, that are going to prove the way marketers and every other vendor out there, how they try to steal our personal information. Then they're going to start a lot of quests as a result. For example, Max Schrems, if you're all aware of him, is a very well-known activist who pressed charges against Facebook a few years ago, and he's a well-known activist who's going to do a lot of things to try and find missing spots with the
We're
vendors.
probably going to see a lot of more.
Yeah, naturally. Again,
What do you do to enable transparency?
Well, I'll divide my answer because Netapp is a huge company, so we utilize Eloqua for like millions of records, and then
Don't say that.
and then we utilize
And HubSpot.
now we're dedicated HubSpot users for our cloud business, which is really our priority in the last couple of years, and it's a growing engine. And we started it. Actually, I started it here a couple of years ago, and we're completely HubSpot. And so my recommendation would be if you're sitting on, practically speaking, if you're sitting on 40, 50, 60,000 records, start auditing. Start looking at all your forms. Start looking at the disclaimers that you have. Change them, add them if you don't have them. And then I would also increase the opt-in tactics that you're doing on your website. So get as many subscribers as you can. to things like blogs and news and updates, because once people are subscribed, they're basically allowing you to send these emails. And again, you have to let them know, by subscribing here, I'm not just going to send you blogs, I'm also going to send you emails and product promotions and things like that.
So maybe the first
So-
step here is to just first off download all the information so that when you turn on any switch that has to do with GDPR, then your information isn't flushed.
Yeah, just audit everything that you have. Look at what you have. Enhance what you have now, and then start thinking on how to expand that opt-in experience that is very, very clear and very transparent. Don't be afraid to tell people what you're going to do. That's really the big change here.
But there is a matter of balance with legitimate business, I can't remember the phrasing.
Legitimate interest.
Legitimate business
Versus
interest, I think,
consent, that's
versus
mainly the
consent.
two
So
basic,
is that something that we just have to wait and see what the courts decide down the road, if this balance or not?
For us, in our industry, it's very, very problematic because
We talked about marketing, but our main business is serving content recommendations, and we are targeting on a monthly basis something like 1 billion UUIDs, like 1 billion browsers. So we don't have direct relationship with them. We don't know who they are. It's very problematic to get their consent. So our perspective here is that we are a joint controller or co-controller with our publishers, and they need to get the consent. On the other hand, there's a new initiative by the IAB Europe, which promotes a new open source protocol to get the user consent, which is a huge revolution. By the way, if you're not aware of it, I suggest you go and do some RTFM about this. And I think that this might change some of the prospect in our industry, because if we will have to get the user consent in the end, then it changes the whole revenue model that we are leaning on, and it's going to be, it can be huge. And I think that it's all a matter of user experience, because if we get the consent, the new consent pop-up for the user, and it's going to be very transparent and very elaborative, and they're going to see all the huge list of vendors that are trying to target them. A lot of them are just going to opt out, unfortunately. But if we're going to design it in a very clever way, very vendor-friendly way, and we can offer a better experience, then we might get some of the conversions back, and we might save some of the revenue model. But it's going to change at least the online advertising industry. It's going to change it. And more,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's pretty much clear.
questions.
But we'll get to questions in a minute, I promise. We're saving time for that. I just want to ask, with respect to certifications or anything else, like what's happening in your company in general, what's the flow? Do we need to get some sort of validation?
Actually, I'm not aware of something with certificate which is valid. There's nothing. You can use a big law firm from EU just to cover yourself, but I think it's a matter of practice. As was said before here, we are all in a gray area, so you can be more aggressive and get a consent in a kind of way. You can get a checkbox and then I agree, or few checkbox, or you just click a button and then you move forward. So it's a matter of the risk management of the certain company. You cannot do anything, because if you don't get consent from the beginning, you will not be able to get it in later on, because it's a matter of conversion. Not all your users will give you consent. It's a long process to getting the consent from the end users.
The overall theme here is risk management,
Yeah.
from all your answers.
And other aspects, it's not only the courts and not only the class actions, it's also a matter of reputation, because if you're not kind of a safe service, if, for example, a Facebook user that now doesn't know whether Facebook are listening to his mobile phone, yes or not, I think it's very risky for Facebook, because if you not trust your vendor, then you may not use this service anymore. For Como, for example, we emphasize to our customers that they are in a safe environment. If they use our service, then they can tell their end user, their clients, that if they give the data is in safe hands. So it's very important also for reputation perspective, and not only for the pure legal issues.
Regarding certification, there is no certification yet. The EU announced that they are working to create this kind of a certification. But on the other hand, companies have to show that they are serious about it. If you have a gap analysis already done and you know what are your gaps and you're managing a working plan and you're on it and you're serious about it, it's not like gaps that you're going to deal with in 3 years from now, yeah?
Then you stand a better day in court.
Exactly. So this is what they are trying to see, but actually this is not the biggest threat for certain kind of organizations. Like Omer said, there are a lot of companies that are actually processors. I don't know if you dealt already with the terms controller and processor, but basically if you're a B2B company, yeah, and you're a company that you're serving, they have to be GDPR compliant. They will want to work with GDPR compliant suppliers. And once you're not there, you're out of business actually, very fast. And this is, for this kind of companies, this is much bigger threat than the regulator itself.
Thank you very much. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so let's open up for Q&A. We have 10 minutes. Yes, please.
I feel like we didn't
Maybe
sufficiently-
stand up.
I feel like we didn't fully talk about remarketing, and it seemed on the panel that there was some disagreement between what is personally identifiable information, whether a cookie is, and I think the only person we didn't hear from was the lawyer on this matter. But basically, okay. But basically, when you if you're just firing a pixel and then you're not uploading a list, you're not actually holding it yourself, you're just allowing Facebook to hold it, for example, and you start remarketing to those people. Can you do remarketing in that way? And like, yeah, like there's all sorts of ways that you use it. There's just simple remarketing, custom audience lookalikes. So how do you do that? And also, people have to be able to opt out. How do you allow people to opt out of a completely anonymous list that you yourself can't unsubscribe people from, right? It's a Facebook thing.
What lawyer wants to take this one?
I can refer to it as well if you want.
First of all, retargeting, and I think Google has changed their privacy policy just a few days ago, saying that their clients need to get consent from the end user in the end, just taking all the accountability away from Google themselves, and they did it obviously. We use cookies, and we must get the user consent before we target our clients. Referring to pixels is a different scenario. We do provide pixels for our marketers, but when we provide the pixel fires and we matched it against our own UUIDs. So the marketer, we do not collect any personal information regarding to the marketer itself, but we get the URL, the firing pixel, and we match it against our own data. So we need to get the consent from the users, from the end user, but the marketer should be okay in that scenario.
So nothing's needed on the funnel.
On the funnel, yeah. If you firing pixels, there are all different scenarios of firing and using pixels, of course. And I know that marketers sometimes want to match those against the CRM data or DMP data for enrichment purposes. So it's a different story. But in the very simple scenario of firing a pixel and match it against the UUID, then the controller or the platform itself should do the consent, to get the consent for you. We didn't talk about a very important legal form that needs to be signed with processors. That's the data processing agreement. It's a fundamental form that needs to be signed with any new processors that you have along the chain. And only then you should be able to continue work with them. That's a very basic thing you need to take into account.
Hello all, my name is Noam, I'm an internet freelance, and I have another angle for this conversation about private internet real estate. For example, if I build a site to a customer of mine and we collect his friends, family, other colleagues, and it can be thousands, for example, of email addresses, how should we treat it, and the angle of GDPR, like, if you understand my question, like, we spoke all about pixels and remarketing and, like, I mean, for example, I don't have site,
I think that answers also the other question, and like Shahar here said, you should make sure that both ends are tied up, like the consent from the one side and your...
if it's my friends and I just open a new business, please look at my
You just need to document it. If you get the consent, then you should be okay. But if you do like HTML scraping over a LinkedIn, for example...
my inbox has thousands of people I already contacted and spoke the last years. Can I send them
That comes down to risk
an
management
email?
again. You know, you call them friends, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Are they okay with what you're sending?
I mean,
Are they
that's
your
what I
friends?
asked, if I can send...
You need to arrange all your information on the person, information in a very clear
Like I
space.
have telephone numbers on my phone, people I work with.
It's a difference between having a database of persons and then if you're contacting them, it's more spam laws. Whether you're allowed to send them emails, marketing emails or not, or the other aspect, which is the GDPR, whether you're profiling them. You're making a profile of each one of them and then you're contacting them based on their profile, which is different. I think you were talking about databases and marketing
I mean,
based on
I have
databases.
thousands of phone numbers on my phone. Can I send them SMS?
It's a matter of
Site,
If you
my
profile
new
your
business?
friends, that's a bit creepy, I would say. If you profile your
I
own
mean,
friends,
like
that's...
my customer or...
Please let your friends know.
Yeah, but if you're individual and you're doing whatever you're doing on your spare time, that's one thing. If you're a business, then you need to comply.
Yeah, I think like WhatsApp group with friends is still not under GDPR at this
Well, it's a good question. What do you do with when you collect the data? What do you do when you collect leads at conference? What do you do when you have your own Rolodex? What is the best thing to do?
Like I worked, for example, in a company years and I'm on freelance. I just want to say hi with my new site and my new business to all people I know. Like it can be thousands of people.
The line goes, if it's personal use, it's okay. In the eyes of the GDPR, if it's commercial use, it's GDPR, you have to be GDPR compliant. This is it. This is the line. Regarding conferences that we talked before, again, this is an issue that the companies that create the conferences, what we'll start to see that they will, when you sign to the conference, you will have some kind of an opt-in form that for all participants, if you sign to the conference and you give business card or you're scanned, it means that it's okay with you that these people will get back to you, because you cannot do it in a one-to-one action. It has to be like in a global solution.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Morris, and I have a question. I don't know if it's relevant to the discussions we're having today, but just recently the government of Israel decided to use, they're talking about using the medical records for the past 20 years of Israeli citizens for commercial use in releasing it. Is that irrelevant? Is that relevant to GDPR?
Yeah, definitely, this kind of data, medical data, is highly protected. It's a very sensitive data. It's a data that once it goes out to the darknet, for example, you cannot change your medical history. You can change your credit card number, but you cannot change your medical history, right? This is the reason that it's very, very sensitive data. If this data is anonymized, yeah, and it's used for statistical use, so in some terms it can be considered as a public interest to do this kind of activities, and that would be okay with the GDPR. Yet, the data subject, if it's pseudo-anonymized, it means that there is a way to go back and to identify the data subject. He has the opportunity to opt out from this kind of activity and not to be part of this kind of activity.
So how is that working here with?
I'm sorry, but we're just short on time, so you can follow up later with them. Yes.
In your opinion, how far is the U.S. behind this? Like, should we start, if it's a U.S. company, marketing to the U.S.?
In my opinion, we're super close based on what we're seeing in the Congress. And you see how Facebook are complying and really making an effort here, and you see how Google are rolling out all these regulations. And I think since they make sense, it's only a matter of time before that's what's coming down the road. But that's me, so.
We comply globally.
Right, like once you comply, you just do it globally.
Yeah. But also the GDPR, there's nothing new about the basics of privacy, which is the getting consent. It's also in the US for decades. Being transparent with the users, it's there already. And the right to be forgotten is also enforced in the US. And the right to know your data is also enforced there. So the GDPR, maybe you have some fines or you have some process. But in the US, actually, it's more of the same. Of course, it's more risky under the GDPR now.
There is an equivalent in the US for the GDPR. It's called the NSA.
One thing we didn't talk about what we did, but the way out. So, and we're actually looking at HubSpot for a lot of guidance for that. But your opt-out option, just look where it is right now. If it's hidden and people are not really seeing it, make it more visible. Because a part of this is not only letting them know what they're getting into when they're walking in the door, giving them the option at every point of time to walk out the door. So that's something I know that we're changing, and we're really enabling that opt-out option of emails,
I agree.
just to be more accessible.
I agree. I think all the major platforms are making it very much about updating regulations, but leaving it up to you to decide what's relevant to you.
If you target German citizens, for example, you are required to do what's called double opt-in. It's not enough to get this tick box. You need to send them an email afterwards, getting them consent.
But GDPR covers Germans as well, so it's going to.
Germany is part of the EU.
That's specific legislation.
It's a very specific.
Double opt-in is not. Most companies think today double opt-in is not a requirement of GDPR.
I know, but in Germany,
It's a
requirement.
They have additions.
Specific requirement.
They have additions in all sorts of
IP started from IP as a personal information started from Germany, by the way.
Yes,
They're very
please.
strict.
It's about legitimate interest, and I'm looking for a SaaS company, and we have pretty big user base, and then some paid tiers. My free users, they agree to the service and to get service-related emails. Do I need to get separate consent from them to send marketing emails for my other paid tiers?
That's a very good question.
Segmentations of lists.
Yeah, you need to get a consent for marketing, but you don't have to get a consent if you provide necessary updates regarding your product, like something which is crucial for the business of the operation. That's not marketing. If you need to update them about a security patch or whatever, then you need to do it. It's a different story.
But I don't have legitimate interest for.
You don't have a legitimate interest to spam them.
Over there in the back.
Come on.
Yeah, you.
Yes, question regarding e-commerce.
I think you have to stand up.
Regarding e-commerce, data. Two questions. One, genetic manipulation of data, like users that bought this, like this, and all kinds of our own reporting and then marketing. And the other thing, if the user wants to see what they do with the history of the purchase. So sometimes they get refunds, sometimes send back or stuff like this. I need the user information. I might need it in order to go on with the business. User wants to see that.
We are not exactly e-commerce, but we do manipulation, how you refer to it, when we serve recommendation. That's what, it's called the profiling. So what we do,
Profiling is like
Yeah, we serve you a recommendation, content recommendation based on what we think is your interest. So we do offer two things. One, first of all, we have when we profile you, when we do this content recommendation, we need to be transparent about it, and we need to show it to you very clearly that we target you and provide you an ad. It should be clearly stated that it is an ad after all, even though it looks like a native content. And on the other hand, you can always opt out. Once you opt out, we detach what we know about you, and it is no longer personal information. We just completely delete it. So you can always opt out from profile.
We have time for one more question? Yes, please. Sorry.
So if I use Gmail, for example, to categorize emails and monitor them, so basically I just start correspondence and then I track the email afterwards. So how can I let them know, or should I let them know that I'm really doing it, and where in this process?
If you're sending them emails, specifically, you need to have their consent doing so. You also need to have a good privacy policy that corresponds to what you're doing. I think that she's asking about.
When tracking emails, so you send an email through Gmail to someone, and then you're starting to track if they open it, they click, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that allowed? Is that not allowed? What does GDPR say about that?
Yeah. What was the answer?
Yeah.
Well, I said that you need to have. I said that you need to have a good consent from a clear consent from the person that you're sending them emails. And you also need to have a good privacy policy that reflects what you're doing.
Yeah, but where should they interact with this policy? Because I'm sending them a regular email, so in signature, for example?
If you don't have a website, it's a good place to start, yes.
And you need to leave them the ability to unsubscribe.
So unfortunately, we're out of time. I think maybe if you guys are staying around, then people are welcome to come and ask, but I can't volunteer on their behalf, so give it a try, and if they run out, then it's for them. I want to really thank you for your time this morning. I hope this was helpful for everyone. So thank you very much. And I think the bottom line here is that it's still very unclear, and that we need to mitigate risks and see what makes the most sense in a balance.
We're not done yet. So come on, 10 more minutes, I promise.